Welcome back to FM Live. I'm Mike, this is Matt, and in this episode we're going to talk about Zombie Elvis. So Zombie Elvis, you might have seen we posted some more videos, pictures, and information about this car. Today we're going to answer kind of some FAQs, if you will. So today we've got Matt here to answer and make up some excuses as to why he's wanting to race this silly Miata. Before we get into that, though, I will mention if you haven't seen the video, I do strongly recommend checking it out. There's actually a pretty cool video that kind of covers the introduction of this car. So check out FlyinMiata.com on the main page on our banner, and it talks about the new t-shirts that we have, which we'll cover again later, but also there's the video link. So go check that out if you haven't. So, Matt, tell us, why a Miata Hillclimb car?
Well, I guess why not a Miata Hillclimb car? It's the answer to everything, I've always heard. So we're kind of pushing the envelope a little bit for that saying, and it was convenient. We had a spare.
So as far as that's concerned, do you have any background in Hillclimb, or is this kind of a new foray? Because obviously most people don't use Miatas for Hillclimb.
That's correct. This is a little bit of an odd bird. I haven't seen any other Miatas in our group. I do have a little bit of dirt history, more on the circle track side, so I do like the off-road experience, and the Miata was a huge question mark for us, and we were just trying to figure out if it was possible to even compete with these other crazy cars at the Hillclimb.
Right. So, and while we're talking about this, if you have any questions, you want to ask Matt a question and you want to know something weird and crazy, wacky about this car, leave us a comment and we'll try to get to it as we go through the video. So, being a circle track guy, are you pretty used to doing lots of loose driving or, asphalt driving? Like, what's your background as far as that's concerned? Because obviously, again, this is a pretty odd use for a Miata. So does this stack up against what you've done before?
It's more challenging than circle track. With the circle track, you still have a loose oversteer, which is really, really fun. Mm-hmm. But wheel-to-wheel racing brings another aspect to that of difficulty. This, you're not wheel-to-wheel, it's A to B, so it's just you and your favorite car up the hill. A lot of oversteer, trying to compensate for a changing course each run, because there's probably 10 different classes. You run up, you realize, or you get a good picture of the track, and then all these cars go in front of you before your next run, and now there's large rocks that you can't go over that you need to avoid and change your whole racing line. So
right,
pretty difficult.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and maybe to expound on that, for the people at home that may not know what Hillclimb is about, why don't you kind of give a brief rundown, like what is a Hillclimb? What are you expected to do in the race?
Finish is the most important thing. So Hillclimb is, you start at point A, we do a rolling start. Once the flagger throws a flag, then you can accelerate as fast as you can. All of our races are between 2 and 5 miles, and most of that is gaining elevation with a lot of switchbacks. So switchbacks for our flatlanders, it's pretty much at least a 90-degree turn, probably more sometimes, going up a steep hill with a lot of exposure. So there's no guardrails where we run, there's aspen trees and some sharp rocks. So you can't really run 10, at least I can't run 10/10 because you don't have a nice sand trap or a long paved area where you can collect yourself again if you do blow past a corner. So you leave a little bit on the table, but still it's nice to drive it the next race instead of trying to repair it all the time. So
Sure. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the car now that we've covered kind of what it's doing and why you're into it. So we've had a few questions about the car. Obviously, this is a pretty wacky build for, you wouldn't expect most Miatas to look quite like this. So one of the common things is this car, you've done some pretty interesting body modifications. You can see it's got a new modified front end, you've chopped the fenders, it's got mud flaps, all that kind of stuff. So talk us through a little bit of why you've done the modifications to the chassis like this that you have for this particular racing car.
Sure, Mike. So we are doing some of the same things as you would on asphalt. The front splitter does just what you think it would. It splits the air. So you want the majority of the air to go over or around the car. So that divides this. You don't want a lot of air to go under the car because that creates lift, just as an asphalt race. So that's the purpose of this. The air dam serves similar purpose, as in getting the air to go around the car and a nice flat area. With a standard bumper, you'd have a couple of cosmetic turn-ins, and just you possibly could have fog lights. We want to have a nice flat area so that the air doesn't have any disturbances trying to get around the car. And if you can see inside here, the air box is next. This air box goes directly into the front of the radiator. So this helps a lot with cooling the radiator and not having any air to go around the radiator. It's pretty much forced in. And then I had to have a little bit of access holes because my air filter is right under here, and my IATs were getting pretty high without that access. In the future, I'm sure we will cover the front tires for the same reasons of air going around the car and getting less disturbance instead of the front tire making all that disturbance there. But for this year's races, it was pretty much just try to build it and figure out the rest as we gain knowledge.
So talk to us a little bit about the suspension on this car. This car is a little bit lifted, right?
It is. I believe there's some fender missing, so it probably looks a little bit exaggerated. I probably cut 3 inches off of the fender. For the larger tires, we're running a 215/65, so that's about a 26-inch tire, which doesn't seem that tall, but we have it offset so much. For turning radius, I needed to have a pretty wide fender well.
Sure. And stock tires are roughly 23 inches, so this is a tire that's 3 inches taller than a normal street-going Miata.
For sure.
So that wouldn't fit on a normal car.
Not very well.
No.
And we're having, I think I have about 4 or 5 inches of travel on suspension, so on the course there's no huge jumps, but it's a maintained gravel road, so you got a lot of dips, ruts that you're trying to have that suspension soak up. So more travel is more better. And
it's pretty smooth for the most part, except for those, or is it kind of just,
It's a rough road at the end of the day. Other competitors will be blowing tires off because they run a really low pressure. We're not able to just because of our setup at the time, but they'll run a really low pressure with the bead lock, and they'll still clean off a tire because the road conditions are so bad.
So obviously this is a very specialized suspension and tire setup.
It is.
To be able to run this kind of a course.
We're doing a dual adjustable AFCO shock to help that situation out. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Lots of vibrations or frequencies on the gravel roads there. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So other than the aero package stuff up here in the front and the suspension that's kind of jacked up, lifted, what other body modifications have you had to do to be able to withstand this kind of heavy-duty racing? Obviously, this is something that you're probably taking some hits on that track if it's kind of bumpy and has potholes, or especially throughout the day when other cars kind of tear it up. What things do you have to do to keep this car from coming apart?
The splitter is aero, but it's also serves another purpose. We have it going all the way back to the bell housing, so it protects the oil pan on the engine. Obviously, it could come up and still contact the oil pan, but it'll disperse the weight for a sharp rock breaking our oil pan there. So that helps a lot. A little bit of a skid plate there. A lot of our competitors thought it needed to be out of at least 1/4 to 3/8 inch steel, but we've only gone through one, and that wasn't even on one of our road course races. It was on a tarmac course that had its last life there. So
gotcha.
So underbody protection all the way back to the bell housing. We do have some frame rail stiffening, but that's pretty much goes along with the subframe kit for the V8. And then everything else is built just to V8 specs. We have a CTS-V rear end. So just you're building up to the horsepower mostly, and the road is still hasn't broken anything from that point. So
gotcha. So pretty solid.
It is.
Which is good.
Yeah, we're always still pretty surprised when we get to the top, look under, because there's a lot of bad noises happening. It's pretty much a hailstorm inside the car from all the rocks coming up. And it's always a nice sight when you get under the top of the hill, under the car, and there's nothing hanging down and dragging. So,
right,
yeah.
Right. So if something were to happen, what kind of safety measures do you have in place to keep you out of trouble in this car?
Yeah, so we did safety first on this one. We have full cage, roll cage here, 6-point, full fire suppression, and Hans device, we have to wear your standard race seat 5-point harness, and that's for the personal safety. For the car safety, since we're torturing it so much, I decided to do an alarm system that will alert us when the temperature is over 250 or under, or the oil pressure is under 10 psi. So we get to keep focused on the road and not looking at the gauges there. So
sure.
Yeah.
So speaking of keeping things healthy, let's take a look at how healthy this car is.
Sure.
Why don't you pop the hood for us?
It's as you can tell, back from its latest race just this last weekend, and I didn't really want to clean it up just so the viewers could see what you get out of a race. It's not terrible. We did have some rain, so you can see a little bit of splatter all over the place, but as you can imagine, gravel roads, over 100 miles an hour, there's some dust. So there's not a whole lot of controlling the dust. It's just simply everywhere, and then it gets a good bath a little bit later when it gets home.
Sure. So. Well, tell us a little bit, just kind of give us a rundown on the specs on what kind of power this makes.
Yeah, so it has a 500 horsepower cam. This is an LS3. Looks very similar to our Flyin Miata V8 kits that we would build for customers. Cold air intake. It's about 450 at the wheel, so plenty of horsepower, especially on those 215s. Let's see, fire suppression is coming up to extinguish, hopefully, no issues going on in there. In the engine bay, I did opt for a transmission cooler. I'm sure you saw that in the air box there. We have an active pump so that we can get good fluid all the way to the input shaft of the T56. So we are hoping to keep that alive as long as we can. We have quite a bit of money in that. So
right, that's always important.
Yeah. For the exhaust, it's our V8 kit from FM going back to the V8 muffler. So pretty, it could be a customer's build besides a little bit of the wonkiness on the outside there. So.
Sure. So with 450 horsepower, how do you put it all down to the ground? You said 215 millimeter width tires. That's pretty skinny for that kind of power. So what do you do? How does this work? You know, are you just slip and sliding the entire time?
You can, yes. Pretty much the first run outs of the day, it's very loose marbly, so a lot of wheel speed, and you do want wheel speed to clean off the surface, so you do come down to a hard pack. Once you're to the hard pack and you're not turning, you actually do get traction, and there's pretty good traction. You can actually put your head back into the seat, which is pretty amazing. So the compound of the tire, the aggressiveness of the tire really helps into that. With the wider tires, which you might see back there, hopefully for next year at the rear end there, that's what our competitors are running. They're about a 28-inch diameter, very soft compound, and if you can't tell, it is at least twice as wide as what we're running now. So
what's the tread patch on this one?
Whew.
Probably measured in inches since it's that wide.
It is
11.5 or something.
On the large guy?
Yeah, on the new tire.
It's at least 12.
Oh, really?
I think they put them on 14-inch rims, but that will give it a little bit of a
sure.
taper there too.
Sure. So when these go in, are you going to need to do any kind of extensive body work beyond what you've done to the fenders to make that fit, or do you think that there's going to be a pretty simple fit up whenever the new rubber goes on?
When it's not inflated, it seems to be a little bit easier, but of course we can't run them that way. So
sure.
If I take this flare off, what I did is I pretty much, your inner fender, it comes up flat like this and then it curves back down to meet the outer fender from the factory. So what I did, I cut all this area out here so it just comes up flat all the way across. And that's not my issue. It's the width this direction, so I'll have to come up further into the body behind the rear door. The back bulkhead is where I'm going to have to butt that up to. So yeah, I think a couple of days, and of course, as you can tell, these are highly custom made. We might have to rethink that option one more time, but everything is very disposable, and we wanted to keep it inexpensive for obvious reasons. So
right. Well, it seems like we've got a question or two from the comment section, so let's hear from them real quick.
What is the typical competitor car in your class?
So, great question. What is the typical competitor car that you're up against in the classes that you're racing?
So I race exhibition, so any competitor car can be in that. Brian, the co-owner, he runs an open comp. So those are specific for open wheel cars. 800,000 horsepower twin turbo LS3s are in his class and mine. Wells Coyote chassis are a lot in the open comp class. You'll see those in the older hill climbs. They actually ran them on pavement also. But in exhibition, we can have UTVs, ATVs, bikes. Pretty much anybody that wants just additional runs can run an exhibition with me.
So basically, you're up against all of it.
Yeah, and I'm the new kid, so you know how that goes.
Right. So you said some of the cars, like the Coyote chassis that you're racing against, that they do some asphalt stuff. Mm-hmm. Have you done asphalt in this car?
Just at the local track. It's a really large go-kart track, but kind of a small kart track. So I think it's almost a mile?
It's 9/10 of a mile, yeah. It's closer to like a medium-sized autocross than it is what you think of as a miniature golf cart kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's very good for suspension and brake testing.
Right.
Having a V8 doesn't gain you very much at that track, but getting familiar with how the car performs in corners is what we're after. So we did some local events there. I'm pretty sure we didn't break any record times, but still getting used to the car.
Are you running on the same setup, or do you change anything between switching from loose gravel over to asphalt?
So we do change suspension. Obviously, we drop it down with heavier springs with our Fox kits, and then we'll run I think we're about a 245 slick tire, depending on what we got going on. So
pretty normal compared to what most guys would think of as a track Miata setup.
Exactly.
For something this high horsepower.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, for sure.
Gotcha. So other than that, what interesting little tidbits can you tell us about the car that we haven't heard already? Is there any Easter eggs per se in this car that are kind of fun little things that you did to be able to make something work that is not standard in a Miata build?
Yeah, the list is long there. I'm sure I tried to forget most of them because they were a pain for me. Just modifications. But the major modification would be just trying to get the wheels to fit in the chassis there. Everything else would be your standard V8 conversion past the roll cage. So we did do, not on a modification, but just a super fun option on the car. We have a sequential shifter in there from S1. So you'll just simply bang the gears rearward for upwards and then forwards for downward. So we might not be professional rally drivers, but boy, it sure feels like it when you're in there. So
it's all about the miles per mile, right?
It is, exactly. Yeah, we got a fancy handbrake in there to lock up the rears. You can just hit the gas to spin the rear end around, so I'm not sure why we did that, but just in case you need it.
It looks awful cool.
It does.
I'll say that much.
Yeah. Besides any other fancy bits, I'm sure it could be fancy for other people, but I've been building this car for, 6 or 7 months, so I guess I'm getting used to it as a standard Miata now, so which seems really, really weird. So
well, obviously this won't be driving to work probably, but
no, we have we're not able to drive this one. So,
right. Yeah, non-registerable, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but
or it keeps the tickets away.
That's true. There's probably a bright side, a silver lining to this.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah. So I see we've got some more comments. Let's take another comment.
I might pitch these at the same time. One is asking about spring rates, and one is asking about what brake setup you have.
Ah, good questions. So wondering about spring rates for the car and what kind of brakes do you have? So why don't you cover those?
Sure. So for the gravel suspension setup, we're running AFCOs, which I mentioned before. The spring rates are 600 front and 400 rear. And it seems the car works really well, so it moves around, which is odd for us since we kind of are more focused on the tarmac side of Miata racing. But getting used to it working around transfers a lot of load to the corner, which we struggle on trying to get corner entry and exit. When we go to the tarmac setup, we're running the Flyin Miata Fox suspension, and we ran a pretty high spring rate in the front. I think we're about 900 and 500 in the rear. So we wanted to see what that would do with the car, and we haven't had a whole lot of tarmac time with this yet, but maybe you guys will see us at Laguna Seca at the Miata reunion this year. It will be there. Unfortunately, not in its rally setup. That's what I would really like, but it'll be dressed in a tarmac car. So come visit us at that time.
Sure. So let's cover also, before we move on, what kind of brakes do you have?
Yeah, right. So this would be the Willwood Flyin Miata kit, the 6-piston up front with the power lights in the rear. It would be our standard kit that we would suggest to V8 customers.
So basically, this is our Stage 2 Big Mama Jama kit.
It is.
Yeah, so
that's correct.
This is something we've run on multiple race cars before. This is used on multiple V8 race cars, in fact. So it's a pretty tried and true solution. We're really happy with it. Pad changes are nice and easy. Lots of options. So.
Yeah, for sure.
And as I understand it, with these wheels, just because they're steel stamp wheels, the fitment was pretty close, but was able to make it work without too much trouble on the bigger brakes.
Yeah, they are very close, but that was a delight when we found out we didn't have to space them out, so they are just directly bolted on.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, do we have any questions? Anything else? All right. Well, we won't keep you here forever. Thanks for joining us today. We wanted to just kind of cover some of the interesting little tidbits about Zombie Elvis. So if you're interested in Zombie Elvis and you want to learn more about it, again, we've got some information on our website. Just go to the main page. You'll see the banner going across with the Zombie Elvis t-shirts, which, by the way, are limited edition. So if you're interested in picking up one of those t-shirts, make sure that you do so this week. They'll be just around for a few more days before the ordering process is closed down. They're pretty neat. They kind of look like a band t-shirt. So if you like going to see rock shows or whatever, there's also tour dates on the back. They're basically race day dates, so they're a lot of fun. That will also have information in the video that we talked about before if you want to know kind of some more of the initial background of how this car came to be. So go ahead and check that out if you'd like to see more. If you have any questions about the car, of course, you're certainly welcome to leave us a comment below or contact us via phone or via email, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. This is kind of a pet project for Matt, but I'm sure that if there's something that you're interested in finding out, we can probably get that information for you. So again, thanks for following us here on FM Live. We'll be joining with you next week. Thanks again, Matt, for bringing by Zombie Elvis for us to take a look at and show off.
Sure.
We sure appreciate it, and we'll see everybody next week. Thanks again.
Thank you.